I want to share with you today a story, really a kind of tragedy involving women farmers. Specifically, a tragedy about opportunities passing people by. I'm going to mention three specific people without mentioning names and see if this kind of story and sequence of events matches anything that you've experienced yourself or have heard of anyone else experiencing, especially if that someone is a would-be woman farmer looking for land. Near Scottsville, Virginia, there's a case of a poultry farmer who was looking for 5 to 10 acres to start her operation on and spent a lot of time figuring out exactly how many chickens she wanted to raise on that piece of land and how exactly the chickens would fit into that landscape and who the market would be and what the benefits would be for the landscape and the grass and the soil and climate change and all these things to sell the landlord on. And she spent weeks trying to put together this information before she approached this landlord. And while she was working on this plan, a guy, and I hear this person was literally drunk when they went to visit the landlord, simply banged on the door one day and asked if they could go ahead and get a contract to hay the property. And the landlord just went ahead and said, sure. And that opportunity was lost. Near Scottsville, outside of Charlottesville, there was another instance, this time of a vegetable farmer who was looking for a new piece of land to set up hoop houses and to do some row crop outside of hoop houses. There was a beautiful piece of land near I believe it was an equestrian estate, as many estates outside of Charlottesville, Virginia are. And again, this person decided that the landlord might not be too keen about having these plastic, longhouse-shaped facilities all over their property, and that row crops might appear to be unsightly given the unbroken pastoral green that you find in the rolling hills of equine estates in Charlottesville. So she spends some time deciding whether or not she wants to pursue this opportunity in the first place, figuring that someone might say no. And then finally spending a huge amount of time figuring out how to design greenhouses and hoop houses whose exterior facades would match the existing barns and other horse infrastructure on this estate. And again, while these plans were being made, while this careful consideration was being given by this woman to the person that she was hoping to enter into this land-based relationship with, while she was working on all of that, someone else came in. A man, a row crop farmer who just on a lark hit up this landlord and got a yes right away without having to cater really to any of this landlord's specific desires. They just basically asked, hey, you got an extra acre in the back? And they said, yeah, and that was it. And then finally, perhaps the most tragic example of all of these happened in Maryland, right outside of White Plains, where a woman farmer decides to draft a detailed profit and loss for a diversified business that consists of chickens and pigs and a couple of cattle, and I believe there was agritourism involved, like a petting zoo type thing, and also a couple of hoop houses and some row crop and a CSA, and there was a plan to, I believe, tie into the La Plata farmers market, just this big, detailed business plan for a farming business that, again, they wanted to be able to present to a landowner to justify them being on a piece of land or asking to be on a piece of land. And just as in the other two cases, while this detailed plan was being put together, another person, a man, at least this one wasn't drunk this time, but a man comes in without a plan at all, approaching the landlord and saying, hey, I'd like to be able to hold on to this property with some kind of a leasehold. I don't know exactly what I want to do with it yet, but it's going to be something around small farming. And the deal was made just like that. And it didn't just stop there, but shortly after, this landowner passed away without any heirs, deeding the property for free, except for whatever the transfer cost or whatever kind of tax thing there might have been involved. But this person didn't have to pay for the land. This person was given the land by the deceased landowner, like it was his son. There's something about our culture as regards masculinity that says it's okay for men to fake it till you make it. This has been kind of the underpinning of the entire economy and culture as it exists today. It involves mostly men speculating on various enterprises with no real idea how it's going to work out, and often no idea how what they're going to do is going to impact other people. That's a specific form of masculinity that's born out of our colonizer, exploratory, and extractive culture. And no one's really immune to it. My own story of winding up at Stratford Hall is remarkably similar. I had more of a plan and had kind of an established business when I approached these people, but nevertheless, when I realized that the land at Stratford Hall, the 100-something cleared acres and the God only knows how many other uncleared acres behind it, when I learned that this might be available, I didn't really stop and think about how to approach this relationship in detail with whoever this landowner was. I just picked up the phone, or in my case specifically, I opened up my email and shot one off. I mean, between the time that I saw the opportunity was available and me contacting someone was maybe 5 minutes. And that 5 minutes was the 5 minutes I spent driving from Stratford Hall to wherever the nearest internet connection was. Women, on the other hand, are much more careful. They're much more considerate of the needs of the people that they're going to get into the relationships with. They move slower. They move more deliberately. There's more care involved. There's more of a sense of developing a relationship rather than seizing an opportunity. And when I encounter people who go through this, when I encounter women, for example, who go through the 3 scenarios that I've described at the beginning of this little mini episode, I kind of jokingly tell them to channel their inner mediocre white man and just go for it, consequences be damned, but I'm not exactly serious. The solution to this problem of women basically being scooped by men in getting their hands on these landscapes to put them into a regenerative or relational system or what have you, the solution is not for women to be more like men. Agriculture and food systems do not need more well-intended speculative zeal and bravado and move fast and break things that you find with men being in charge, which is what's gotten us into this mess in the first place. We need that female ethic, which is exactly why with most indigenous agricultural societies, you found women were the ones who, quote unquote, owned the earth, owned the farms, owned the food, and owned the relationships that made sure that everyone was fed and provisioned and cared for. Because in our societies and in our way of dividing society along gender lines, which I think a lot of modern progressives might find a little bit distasteful, but nevertheless, that's the way it was, women were better at it. Women were more focused on relationships, making sure that people were cared for. They were more defensive. They were more, I hate to use this word, but more nurturing. But where colonial societies used that gender division to relegate women to the home and take away their sense of political power and control over the society, with indigenous societies, it was the opposite. Women were the best at taking care of things and preserving the culture, so women were given real power. Again, women were given ownership, as we considered it, of the land. They were the ones who owned the houses. They were the one who owned the food. Anyone, be they man, woman, or child, who found themselves with something to eat or a roof over their head, had that because a woman decided that they should. And if women decided that you should not have it, you would not have it. Women had real power. Men in societies like mine, societies to the north with the Six Nations and Iroquois speaking people and Algonquin speaking people south of my people, all of these were united by a cultural imperative that women made the consequential decisions and men mostly existed to steward their decisions and to steward female will. It was elder women, head women, and clan mothers who were making the decisions about what men should do when they left their towns and left their villages in pursuit of trade, war, and diplomacy. It was women who decided how much food to grow out of the ground, how much food to take from the forests in terms of forage. It was women who decided what to do with the meat and the fish that men brought back from their hunting and fishing expeditions. Once that stuff came into the town, it belonged to the women of those towns and of those villages. Women were responsible for knowing how much everyone needed to eat, what everyone needed to eat, and once everybody was fed, what to do with the surpluses. It was women who told men which fields to clear, which trees to girdle, and how successful their hunts or their fishing expeditions would need to be based on their forecasts of what the corn harvest or the forage harvest might look like that particular year. All of the power necessary to make these societies function was invested in women, not just as soft power, the kind of tacit power that, like, a 1950s wife might have sort of kind of had over her husband to an extent, but real, actual decision-making power. And we're talking hard power here. We're talking about the ability to kill a chief or a headman, for example, if the body of women decided that he was misrepresenting their will. Within indigenous societies, maleness, by which I mean chemical, biological maleness, a la having a preponderance of testosterone in your body, that maleness, that outsized physical power and bravado and the need to exercise that power and bravado on something, existed in a society that was organized to put that power at the service and disposal of female power. I think there's an important aside we have to take at this point. The indigenous societies we're talking about, these agricultural societies, had social organizations that were gendered and binary. Like, full stop, they were gendered and they were absolutely binary. But it's important to note that gender fluidity of the individual was recognized and real and not even stigmatized. There were certain boundaries at the intersection of sex and gender. For example, in my own culture, you weren't going to find anyone with a penis being a clan mother, and you weren't going to find anyone with a vagina going through Huskanaw. But you did have, for example, people with vaginas who were noted warriors, who would go on diplomatic missions, and who were skilled orators, typically, quote-unquote, male jobs. And on the other hand, there were people with penises who did none of those things, and instead made their contribution to society the way they saw fit as farmers and foragers, or hide scrapers, or corn pounders. And this is important, no one gave them a hard time about it. Gender fluidity is a very old and very well-accepted concept within our cultures. And today it's described by a pan-Indian term called two-spirit, which a lot of people have probably heard of before. A lot of people also think it's interchangeable with gay or LGBTQ, which it most certainly is not, but rather it's describing the spirits that exist within a person that are to some extent male and some extent female. And within our cultures and our spiritual beliefs, the idea is that as long as the spirits that drive you aren't driving you to do any harm to the people around you or to the society at large, then those spirits are good spirits. There are, of course, bad spirits that can drive people to selfish or violent or narcissistic behavior, and people possessing those spirits tend to be dealt with more or less extreme prejudice. But the kind of benign or benevolent spirits that cause, say, someone with a penis to be a better farmer than a hunter then those spirits are to be accommodated. Because what is the social good of forcing someone to be a half-assed hunter instead of a kick-ass farmer just because he has a penis? But leaving all that aside, at least for now, the question that I think is pretty obvious at this point is how, in a modern context, do we create a more intentional culture around food, land, and community by putting the masculine at the service of the feminine in the Indigenous way? Maybe we do that with organizations at the community or regional level that are run by and directed by people of feminine spirit who know the needs of the communities that they're going to be serving and know exactly how people need to be taken care of in those places. And those women, those organizations, those femmes deploy people of masculine spirit to, for this specific example around land, secure access to land on spec, so that then the women and the femmes who are driving these organizations can decide exactly what's to be done with those places in the service of those communities. Now, the devil is in the details, as goes that idea, or maybe that idea is just a wholesale terrible idea. But I do know this, that by deliberation or circumstance, the age of men being in charge is coming to an end, and it can't come soon enough. And the question we have to answer is, how do we recenter feminine power so that we can all survive happily on this planet and with one another? I'm curious to hear your ideas about how we can do exactly that.